Hello, my name is Patrick Greibel. I am the General Manager of Affordable Solar, which is located in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this is a presentation that we've been asked to give for New Mexico Solar Energy Association, and we're pleased to do it. We've been longtime partners with NMCA and love the work they're doing in helping educate the public about solar. Because at the end of the day, really educating about solar is great business for us. And the talk that I'm going to give today focuses, I say focus, but that may be a misnomer. It focuses on the economics of solar, but the economics of solar really encompasses so much about solar that's why I would probably use the word focus in air quotes. But the reality is, at the end of the day, I think a lot of folks would consider themselves green. Survey after survey, majority of folks say they care about the environment, say that they're green, but there's a but there. A lot of green technologies that people would like to adopt need to make financial sense. Certainly for some people, it doesn't necessarily need to make financial sense. And those are the folks who had solar back in the 80s and are still proud to, they had the first Prius off the assembly line, and we love those folks too. But they've been customers of ours for a decade or more. And for solar technology to really make a big difference, it's going to have to be adopted in much greater numbers. I'm happy to say that when I started in this business back in 2007, I remember doing a business plan for the first solar company. I started a company called 310 Solar. I founded that with a couple of partners. And we did a business plan, and we looked, and we tried to figure out how we'd make money with that. And if you'd taken that business plan to a banker, which we didn't do because we thought they might call security, they would look at you like you're crazy, and then they'd call security and you'd be escorted off the property. I mean, at that time in the whole state of New Mexico, I can still see that screen on the website I was looking at. There were about 100 systems interconnected throughout the entire state. We're not even talking just the big utilities service area. We're talking about the whole state. There was something like 100 systems interconnected, and this was in late 2007. That doesn't seem like that long ago. At this point, we're closing in on, I think we're close to 4,000 systems that are interconnected. That's a meteoric increase in the number of solar systems that have been interconnected since 2008, and that's a great statistic. It gives us all hope. But at the end of the day, let's use the number 4,000. There's approximately 400,000 meters on PNM's grid. So at 4,000, I'm not a math guy, but that's 1%. So if you would talk to anyone in marketing, they would say we're still in the early adopters. I mean, we haven't even gotten past the bleeding edge of this technology from an economic adoption level. So that was a really long-winded way of telling you that there's still something that gets in the way. And what gets in the way is that solar technology is it's still a very complicated technology. There's a lot of misinformation in the marketplace about it. And if people, property owners, really understood solar technology in terms of the economics, they all would have had solar 5 years ago. But I'm not giving up hope. The economics are still compelling. We still have several years ahead of us. We've still got 99% to go, and we're not going to stop till we get there. But these are the things that kind of get in the way. So my hope is that with this presentation, I can try to simplify some of those things. And we could go into a lot of depth on every single one of these slides. I'm not going to do that today, but we're happy to do that one-on-one with anyone who wants to come by and talk about solar. Come visit us at Affordable Solar. We're right there on I-25 at Jefferson. We've got pretty decent coffee. Come in, sit down, let's talk about solar, because there's always more questions than answers. But my hope is to try to simplify that. So why do I know what the heck I'm talking about? Some would argue I don't, but I have been in the solar industry since 2007, which in this industry is like, six lifetimes practically. I am an attorney by training. I graduated from the UNM Law School in the early 2000s. Worked at the big law firm for many years, but ever since I was a kid, have always been interested in solar technology. When I was in high school, I used to do papers on this thing that called the greenhouse effect. No one really knew what the heck that was back in the mid 80s, late 80s. And certainly nobody was concerned about it. In the 90s, a lot more people got concerned about it, a lot of really smart people. And now anybody who's paying attention is probably really concerned about it. But that's one of those issues that kind of divides people politically. The one issue that I think brings a lot of people together is money. And the good news is we can all kind of rally around the dollar bill when it comes to solar technology, regardless of one's political persuasions, because it makes financial sense. And again, that's kind of the focus of what I'd like to talk about today. As I said, I started a solar company about 6 years ago, have been involved in the industry since then. Came back full-time to the industry about 1.5 years ago to serve as general manager at Affordable Solar, and have been loving every minute of it since then. I've been counsel for the Renewable Energy Industries Association, and in that capacity and as a board member of the association have been front and center with a lot of the key political and policy battles and debates that have shaped the market and where we are right now. So I'd like to think I know a little something about what I'm talking about. And I started this journey. I read a book by Yvonne Chouinard. It's called "Let My People Go Surfing," and I read that book, and I was working at the big firm, and I just decided, what am I doing with my time here? I need to go start a solar company. And so I went and I told the managing partner of the law firm what I was going to do, and they didn't have a drug policy at the firm, so they couldn't fire me on those grounds. But they were really happy for me, but they kind of wondered, what is this guy talking about? I mean, this technology's been around. They all remembered the big thermal boom of the 80s. This business is not going anywhere. And just in the time that I've been there, I can't take really any of the credit for this, but it has gone somewhere, both internationally, nationally, and here locally. The growth in solar has been impressive, and it continues to grow. And my hope is that by watching this presentation, you will help us grow the industry even more. Because just when I left a fairly high-paying job to go to a market that, soaking wet, had the possibility of 100 systems a year, at least if you were looking at the numbers in those days, it's not about the money. Solar technology is about something greater, but we've reached a tipping point, because now for a very wide swath of property owners, especially in New Mexico, for whom it's probably not all about the money, but certainly if you could get paid to adopt a technology that you knew was the right thing, well, that would certainly make the decision a lot easier. And that's where we are now. Except in a few rare circumstances, solar technology for property owners, both residential property owners and business property owners, even the big utility, solar technology makes economic sense. So that's what I'd like to talk about today. As we start the presentation there, the sun is shining and you could be saving, and that's a true statement. Let me talk just a little bit about Affordable Solar. We were founded in 1998. We are an Albuquerque-based company, even though we have a national and international footprint. We're NABCEP certified, many of our installers, and the installation company's focus in New Mexico is in providing turnkey solar solutions. Originally, Affordable Solar was founded by David Hughes as a solar distribution company. It started out as a mail order company, and if you remember, mail order, like before the internets, you would get this thing in the mail and you could order things from it. It was crazy. So that's how we got started, and then the transition to a web-based company was a natural transition in the mid-2000s, where we've been very successful as a national distributor. So successful, in fact, that we've had to kind of turn away some of the do-it-yourself business and focus on installers like ourselves, but in other markets nationally, because we've just believed that's the way to get solar to the most people most efficiently. In 2013, our market share in this market was greater than 50%, especially when you take into account some of the utility scale solar arrays we've installed. So, affordable solar has been installing systems here in New Mexico for several years. We're over 1,000 systems installed as of this taping in the fall of 2014, and we don't expect to slow that progress anytime soon. And as I said, we've been around for over 15 years, so we're not going anywhere. And here's a slide with some of the awards that we've won over the years. That's our founder, David Hughes. One of the awards that we're proudest of is the Best Places to Work award. We've won several times in the past 5 years. And when people ask, what's a little bit different about affordable solar, I mean, that's really the kernel of what's different about affordable solar. It's a great place to work because if you work at affordable solar, you believe in the technology and you get to be surrounded by people who believe in the same stuff. You're surrounded by a lot of people who could be doing other things and making more money doing those other things, but have chosen to be there because they believe in the technology. And so it just lends itself to a great vibe, and that flows down to the way we treat our customers. We believe that the customer experience it's simply the most important thing that we do. And we do everything we can to maximize and improve the customer experience. We're not perfect. Sometimes we break things. Our trucks run over flower beds every once in a while, but we're always trying to improve the customer experience, and we love to hear from our customers. We're having a customer appreciation party this evening, and it was funny. I was talking to the president, and he said, you're probably not going to get even 50 people to show up to that thing, so let's put it in the budget and let's see what happens. So we did a mailing to every single one of our 1,000 roughly customers, and within a couple days we had so many RSVPs that we had to call the venue and tell them, hey, we've got to move to the bigger room. We need the bigger space. And people just get jazzed about being part of the solar club, and they've been genuinely excited to come and meet other folks who've adopted this technology and talk about the money they've saved over the years. And so that's on some level, I guess, a crusade that we're all on to just get as much solar in the hands of New Mexicans as we possibly can. This is a slide that is already a little bit outdated because we're at just over 1,000 right now, but we plot the location of all the arrays, and as you zoom out, it's an impressive scattering of arrays all over the state. This one is focusing on the Albuquerque area, but chances are in a neighborhood you live in, there's a neighbor who has a system that we've installed or somebody else. And the most important thing to us is that everyone who takes a serious look at solar, we're just happy that you go solar. We happen to think we provide the most value, but at the end of the day, somebody that goes solar versus somebody who decides not to, we're always happy to see somebody else adopt the technology and start to enjoy the many benefits. And as you can see, lots of folks here in Albuquerque and throughout the state have gotten to enjoy that benefit. So now let's get into some of the technical and financial concepts that are the reasons I was talking about earlier, the reasons people decide not to go solar. I think anytime you're faced with a fairly large decision, especially if it involves a technology that you're not really familiar with, again, there's more questions than answers, and the more questions that pop up into anyone's mind, what do they tend to do when they get confused and sort of overwhelmed with information? The easiest decision to make in that situation is to make no decision at all. And I was on a run the other day, and I saw this, I was running down by the bluff, and I saw this rabbit who was being chased by some coyotes. And the rabbit made that same decision, and I can assure you it was not the right decision. Because sometimes making no decision at all in that case can be a terrible decision, and I believe that to be true with solar as well. So if at any point you're in this process, you get kind of confused, and especially when you have different companies telling you different things for self-serving reasons, at the end of the day, just remember that there's two things to remember about solar technology. It's not a new technology. It's been around since the 40s. And by the way, the solar panels, we're talking about solar PV panels that were made in the 40s, are still pumping out energy. They're probably half as big as this room, and they're a 60-watt panel, but they're still producing, probably 30 watts. So the technology is not new. It's extremely simple. It's plug and play. I mean, if it works on day one, chances are it's going to work great in 30 years. Other than a few components that need to be replaced along the way, it's sand. It's silicon. I mean, it's basically a process where we refine sand, put it in the sun, and it makes electricity and rolls your meter backwards. It's really that simple. So as that confusion kind of sets in, just pull back and remember the technology is simple. The other thing to remember is that, and this varies a little bit by market, although in pretty much every market I can think of, this is the case. This is certainly the case in New Mexico. Solar technology cash flows. And by that I mean you will save more, regardless of how you finance a system or whether you finance a system. You will save more on a monthly basis than what you would have paid to the utility. So, and that pitch has changed a little bit since I've been given it. In 2007, when I was talking to the really early adopters about solar, my pitch went something like this. Bob and Janet, you can have solar and it's only going to cost you $20 a month. And I walked past the 4 Priuses in the driveway, and they would say, it's only $20 a month. Yeah, let's do it. But now the pitch is a little bit different. We could have that same conversation and say, and you're going to make $20 a month. Now you're not going to get rich unless you save all those $20 every month and put them in a special interest-bearing account, which, by the way, I've done, and I've already got about 10 grand in it for my kids' college. But if you do that, you actually, I don't know about rich, but you definitely save a lot of money over a significant period of time. But again, when the confusion sets in, just back up and remember, hey, it cash flows, okay? I might make $14 or I might make $11, but you're making money, and it seems to me if you had to choose between 2 power sources and they both cost the same, and you went to somebody and said, look, you can have this one, we're gonna burn some coal, and it's going to give off a lot of smoke, and it's probably going to cook the planet. And you got this other one that doesn't give off any smoke, and it's clean, and they cost exactly the same. Well, what would 9 out of 10 people probably pick? I mean, I haven't run this survey officially. I'm hoping that most people would pick the clean one if it didn't cost them anything. And now we're in a situation where not only does the clean one not cost you anything, but it puts money back in your pocket every month. That's pretty amazing. I mean, I didn't think we'd be there when I started this journey, 6 years ago. I really didn't think we would be there, and we're there. And the reality is that trade-off is going to get more and more stark. And there's a lot of reasons why adopting solar sooner rather than later makes sense. One of them is the longer you wait, the more time you didn't save money and invested in something else. So I've strayed a little bit afield here, but let me get back to my slide. There are several different types of solar. Everything that I've been talking about so far, I've been talking about solar PV or solar electric photovoltaic. There are other types. There's solar heating. And then even in the PV realm, there's different types. There's grid tied, which is what I would venture to say 98% of the solar systems in New Mexico for sure are grid tied. And there's some reasons that makes sense. And then there is battery backup systems. And battery backup systems, the technology's come a long ways there. They're typically, given the expense, battery backup makes a lot of sense if running power to wherever the property is located would cost more than the battery backup equipment. And then there's lots of sort of hybrid type systems in the middle. There are inverters that will provide you with a dedicated 1,000-watt outlet so that if the power were out, the system would still produce energy. You could run a refrigerator or a computer or something like that while the sun was shining for temporary periods of time, but you wouldn't have the complexity and the expense of battery backup. And that's a great place to start if you're concerned about having some sort of energy backup in the case of power outage. But as I say, 99% of what we're really talking about here is solar electric. So here's the way it works. And I can't really see that slide, so we'll see how well I've memorized it here. The sun shines on the solar panels and they produce direct current electricity, which is basically the same type of electricity that's in lightning. It's same as static electricity. It's not alternating current, which is the type of electricity that comes out of an outlet, which is much safer to deal with. The problem with direct current electricity is it arcs. If it has a gap that it needs to cross, once the current is strong enough, it will jump that gap, and of course that causes little problems like fires. So you've got to be really careful with direct current electricity. That is the type of electricity that the system produces, and then it travels down a conduit to what's called an inverter. And the inverter turns that direct current electricity into alternating current. All you need to remember about that is it turns it into the type of electricity that you can use, which means that's where it starts to make financial sense. And once you mention the word inverter, that's where people's eyes start to glaze over and direct current. And just remember the two things I told you. It cash flows and it's a simple technology. If the rest of this just puts you into anaphylactic shock, then when you wake up, come back and let's talk about those two things, and then let's get solar on your roof. So going back to the technical stuff, the inverter produces the alternating current electricity, and then that electricity is either going to go into your house because there's a load, there's a demand for it, a dishwasher's on, a TV's on, something like that, or in a lot of cases it's going to go back into the grid because there is no load to take that energy. And in most of the utility service areas, you will have what is called a REC meter. And REC stands for Renewable Energy Certificate. The long and short of it is that the state of New Mexico has a renewable portfolio standard, meaning all investor-owned utilities like PNM, like El Paso Electric, and Xcel or Southwest Public Service in Roswell and some of those areas, they are required to derive a certain percentage of their energy as a percentage of all the energy they produce for consumers must be from renewable sources. And in the earlier years of that requirement, it was much easier and more cost-effective for the utility to simply provide their customers with a little bit of credit to encourage them to install their own solar than it was for them to install their own utility scale solar. The economics of that have shifted dramatically, but at the end of the day, even currently, as of the time of this taping, there is still a utility REC, or renewable energy certificate. When we talk about a REC meter, that's counting all of the kilowatt hours that the system produces. And a kilowatt hour is simply a measure of energy. In the case of a solar array, if you had a 1 kilowatt solar array that was in direct sunlight for an hour, it would be putting out 1 kilowatt of power. So over the course of an hour, we call that 1 kilowatt hour. So one is power, the measure of how much power the difference is like a snapshot versus a videotape, right? Power is the snapshot. What is the system producing right now? And that's a snapshot in time. It's going to be different from 1 second to the next, depending on if there's a cloud that goes in front of the sun. Well, if you're watching the inverter, the kilowatts that the system is producing will drop dramatically. And that happens in a matter of seconds. But over the course of an hour, it's how much power on average was output by that system over the course of an hour. I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but if you had a 5 kilowatt array in the sun for an hour, it would produce 5 kilowatt hours. The little problem with that is, we lose a little bit of the energy inverting it from DC to AC, and we call that an inversion loss, but generally speaking, that's the concept. So you notice on the slide there, we depict a rec meter, and that is giving you credit for all of the energy that the system produces. And then, of course, you've got your main service meter, and as I alluded to earlier, that's either going to go forward or backward depending on whether or not the energy being produced by the system is being used by that property's load. And when we talk about a property, we're really talking about meters, because that's where all of the electricity either flows into or out of. That's the central choke point by which we measure that. So before I leave this slide, let me give you just a quick example. You can see there the house is depicted during the daytime. You can see the sun there. If those folks are off at work and they've turned off all the appliances and that system is really buzzing along and cranking, then their meter is going to be spinning backwards because they're not there to use that electricity. And so the other concept I'll introduce you to is that of net metering. And that is simply, a lot of people say, well, where's the net meter? Well, there's not a separate meter called a net meter, but we call it net metering. It's the same meter you've always had on the property, but it's going forward and it's going backwards and it's going forward and it's going backwards on a day-to-day basis. And it, at the end of the day, literally, meters what was my net consumption for that day. So if the solar array produced, throw a number out there, 25 kilowatt hours, and I consumed 30, well, the net meter is going to show positive 5 kilowatt hours. In other words, I bought 5 kilowatt hours from the utility at the end of the day, literally. So we take that forward an entire month. You will either have you've got debits and credits every single day, and at the end of the month, you're either going to have a credit because you produced more than the system, you produced more with the system than you consumed in the house, and that does happen in certain months. Or it's going to be the other way around. So for example, at my house, during the shoulder months, like right now, we're in September, tail end of September, early part of October. For the most part, our air conditioner is off most of the day. Might come on a little bit during the hot part of the day, but at night and whatnot, the air conditioner's off. So we're not consuming a lot of electricity in a month like September, a month like October, and yet the system is producing some of the highest amounts of energy it's going to produce year-round because it's nice and cool. Solar panels like cold temperatures. It's a semiconductor, just like a computer chip. So the colder it is, the faster the current flows, and the better the system is going to produce. And so I will end up with a credit this month. At the end of the month, I'm going to produce more than I use. Fast forward to June, July, August, where that air conditioner's cranking, and you can see this. If you go and look at the meter, if the air conditioner's off on a bright sunny day and nothing's on, see that meter spinning backwards, I get really happy. My brain starts releasing endorphins, and just when I'm about to get too happy, you hear that air conditioner come on, and that meter spins the other way really fast. It's like, oh, make it stop. We worked so hard to get there. So that's the concept of net metering in a nutshell. It's a series of debits and credits. The one thing I will say is for the P&M service territory, and if you're in a different utility, every utility is going to have their own rules. PNM has two different programs for most of the property owner type solar. One they call small, so that's 10 kilowatts and below. And kilowatts is simply a measure of system size. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And then 10 kilowatts and above. And the key difference for net metering purposes is that for the small program, they allow your net metering to carry over from month to month. So it's sort of like rollover minutes on a cell phone plan. If I don't use all my minutes this month, I get a credit rolling into next month. Same thing with the solar. If I don't use all the energy I produce, I get to carry it over to the next month at essentially the full retail rate. Whereas with a large program, they do what they call a true-up, meaning at the end of that 30-day period, if you have a credit of 100 kilowatt hours, they go by the avoided rate, which is the PRC approved avoided rate, and they'll send you a check for that amount. So it's usually 2 or 3 cents times 100 kilowatt hours, and you get your whopping check for $2 or whatever it is. So there's a lot of advantages to that smaller system because you are able to use a full year-round look when it comes to net metering. Okay, we've already talked about that. Look at that. I covered that slide before I got to it. And RECs are present in other utilities as well. El Paso Electric has a REC or a renewable energy certificate rate that they pay. It's about 2 cents per kilowatt hour. Southwest Public Service has one as well. It's actually higher, but they also have really cheap electricity. So it's hard to make a lot of systems pencil out in those areas. So if you live in Roswell, forget what I said about solar cash flowing. Call me next year. But their rates are going to go up as well, so that's going to be true in every jurisdiction eventually. Okay. So at this point, and I give this seminar live, I've got thousands of people in the audience. Okay, maybe 30 or 40, and they're all really excited about the prospect of going solar. And I show this picture, and invariably some hand goes up and goes, well, I live under a tree. And, we ask them to leave the room. No, they don't have to leave the room. But if you're under a tree and you're really attached to the tree, you've got a couple choices. If you're really attached to the tree, you probably don't want to cut it down, and we don't recommend that. But you could move. Or in some areas, they have what's known as community solar, where you can buy essentially shares in a utility scale solar project. And in some utilities, you even get the credit for your pro rata share of the energy that array produces. I know Boulder, Colorado has that. There's talk of one in Santa Fe. I don't think it's happened yet. But unfortunately, solar just isn't for everyone for technical reasons. Another situation where solar might not be a good choice for you, when we're talking about rooftop solar, obviously solar in that scenario goes on the rooftop. If you have a very old roof that is damaged or simply in need of being replaced, and the economics of replacing that roof excuse me, and adding the solar equipment don't work, there just aren't a lot of good solutions. And we'll talk about some other options as far as places you could install solar, such as ground mounts or carports and things like that. But as soon as we start talking about a fairly major construction project like a ground mount or a carport, we're adding components and labor to things that aren't producing energy, like concrete and trenching and steel. And as soon as you start adding the cost of those things, they're not going to produce energy themselves. They're holding up the solar array, which is in turn going to produce energy. The economics start to get a little bit less compelling. But the good news is, I would say that of property owners, especially in New Mexico, solar probably makes sense for 70% of them. And as I said in the beginning, we're at 1% now. So we've got 69% of you out there to go. And if that happens to be your house, then you're not one of them, unfortunately. So let's talk a little bit about some different ways to finance solar. And before I do that, let me go back to an important concept, which I think you need to understand before we're talking about how to go solar from a financial standpoint. Originally, I told you, we throw around jargon like a 5 kilowatt system, and I still think, a lot of people hear us talk like that and they go, I don't even know what you're talking about. What's a kilowatt? Well, a kilowatt is a measure of, as we mentioned, power. And that's how a system is measured. And so a solar panel will have a power rating associated with it. In today's market, most solar panels are 250 watt panels. Some are all the way up as high as 300 watts and up. But let's use 250 because the math is easier. If I have 4 250 watt panels, I have 1,000 watts. And 1,000 watts is 1 kilowatt. So that would be a 1 kilowatt solar array. It's the DC power rating of the solar array. So for every 4 panels you see in that array, that's 1 kilowatt. And a lot of folks ask, well, my house is 2,000 square feet. What do you think I need? And that's a better bit of information would be, what is your monthly electric bill? Because that's a better proxy for how many kilowatt hours you're using in a month. Square footage is really not that useful, because there are some 3,000 square foot homes that have plenty of windows, and they may have a swamp cooler, or they may be located over in the East Mountains, and they don't even have refrigerated air. And that 3,000 square foot house might have a tiny usage, and there may be a townhome down in town where they've got flat screens in every room, and they like to leave the refrigerated air set at 68 from May through November, and they may use 3 times as much energy as that 3,000 square foot house. So square footage is not really a useful metric. The only way there's 2 ways to figure this out. One, the best way, and this is the way we do it for 90% of the folks that come and talk to us, is we simply look at their usage over the course of the year. And if you look at a P&M bill, I think I've got a slide here that shows one, and then there we go. If you look at, that's a typical P&M bill, and if you look at those little bar charts over on the left, that's all we need to figure out how many panels we need to put on your roof. And before we can figure out, because then the next question is, what's it cost? Well, that depends entirely on how big of a system we need to put on your roof, and to figure that out, we've got to figure out those little figure out how much energy you've used using that little bar chart there. And in case you can't see that, that's measured in kilowatt hours throughout the course of a year. And so when we plug in a good annual kilowatt hour usage, we know what the panels are going to produce over the course of a year, because there's really no guesswork in that. That we know exactly how much energy a panel is going to produce located, in sunny Albuquerque, New Mexico, based on decades of meteorological data. So all we need to know is, how much energy do you need? We know how much energy the panel is going to produce, and then it's a matter of backing into how many panels we need. So that's an important concept, because it really talks about it informs you on, how am I going to go solar? I get it. It makes sense. I've got a great roof for it. I live in a great state for it. So now, how am I going to go solar? This particular slide talks about different ways to mount the solar. But before I get to that, let me go back to the first concept, different ways to go solar financially. There's essentially 3 ways to go solar, and that too has changed a lot in the 6 years that I've been given this spiel. Back in 2007, 2008, I had one arrow in my quiver, and that was a cash sale. How do we finance it? We don't ma'am, you just write a check for it. How would you like to write me a check for $50,000 for your solar array? And you wouldn't be surprised to learn that a lot of people said, 50 grand, yeah, call me next week. And I haven't heard from those people since. Well, maybe we have heard from a few of them, but that's because additional arrows were added to the quiver. The second of which is financing it. There's some great programs. U.S. New Mexico Federal Credit Union has a great program. It's specifically for solar, that they'll finance solar on a 20-year amortization, which is a great way to go because that matches more or less the life of the system. And there's lots of finance products out there that won't necessarily record a lien against the property. They just record a lien against the equipment. But if you've got a lot of equity in the property and you're not moving, in the immediate future, then a refinance might make sense. So that's the second major way to do it, and that is to finance it. And then the third way is a third-party ownership, which is, nationally speaking, seems to be emerging as the dominant finance model for residential solar. In 2013, a statistic I saw was that something close to 90% of new residential solar installations were because of the solar lease. And a lot of that is, you get some really big companies that do nothing but the lease for the most part, like Solar City. They're not in New Mexico, but that's all they do. So let's talk about the lease. Finance is a product that everybody kind of gets because most of us have financed cars or houses or whatever. And certainly writing a check is a concept that none of us are really strangers to. So those concepts probably don't need a lot of explanation. The lease, however, is new to New Mexico. It's not new, in places like California and New York and whatnot. So the concept with the lease is that a third party is going to own the system. And a lot of folks ask me, well, so they're selling me the energy? Not per se, however, they are fashioning a monthly lease payment to you that is a combination of a couple things. It's the system cost that they're going to pay to install it, because they're the ones writing the check. They're the ones taking the tax credits. And they're the ones who are going to get those REC credits from the utility. So they factor all that in and turn it around to the property owner in the form of a monthly lease payment. Over the life of the lease, and most of them are going to be approximately 25 years, the one we offer is a 25-year lease. They own the system. So if anything breaks or goes bump in the night, that's their problem. And to back that up, they have a performance guarantee. So they're going to spell out for you how many kilowatt hours that system is going to produce in a given year. And excuse me, if it doesn't, then they're going to write you a check for the value of that energy. So that is the utility rate then in effect. They're not going to add the REC rate because they're the ones who are losing out on the REC rate, but they will pay you based on the value of the energy. So in a nutshell, a lease is simply a low, fixed monthly payment. And in most of the cases we look at, you are going to see savings month one. So what would have been, to illustrate this concept, what would have been a $150 P&M bill or utility bill, if you're not in that service territory, you're swapping that for a $140 lease payment. And so a lot of folks go, well, why would I do that? It's only $10. What can you buy with $10? Kind of back to that example of the two different power sources. One's clean, one's dirty, and they cost the same. I ask people that question. Well, they don't cost the same. The clean one's cheaper. You're getting $10 a month. It's better than a stick in the eye. And some people, you don't find that argument compelling. Maybe it's not enough money. But where the money really starts to add up is when you look at the escalation in grid power or the utility rate. And we use a 5% escalation in our modeling to figure out what you would save over 25 years. because we believe 5% is extremely conservative. And I've been challenged on that by a lot of folks who say, my rates haven't been going up 5%. And we go back and we look, especially over the last 5, 6, 7 years, they've actually gone up more like an average of 8 or 9%. And because of the way at least the P&M utility is structured, let me go back to that slide. If you look at those bar charts, you pay, if you look at the back of your bill, see if I've got a slide of that. I don't, I took it out. If you look at the back of your bill, you pay a certain rate for the first 450 kilowatt hours. And it's about 9 cents. And then for the next 450, so 450 to 900, it jumps up to over 11 cents. And this is just for the energy. This doesn't include any of the rate riders, any of that stuff. And then if you look at that last tier, in some months of the year, that jumps up to about 13 cents for the energy itself. And when you add in all the riders and the service charges and whatnot, you're closer to 18, 19%. And that's everything over 900 kilowatt hours. So if you look at a residence that is either just hideously inefficient or very large, and most of their energy is above that 900 kilowatt hours, that's where solar makes the most sense for them, because the cost of the system is going to be less on a per watt basis, because there's economies of scale that we enjoy when we're installing a large system versus a little tiny one. We still have to roll a crew, we still got to put the same fuel in the same truck, we still have to pull a permit, we still have to pay the fees. So now that's getting spread out over a much larger system. The economics, if you use a lot of electricity, are just become downright compelling. And there's a blog on this on our website, which is thinkaffordablesolar.com, where we modeled the actual rate of increase for sort of a McMansion type house. And it was 10%. It was almost 11%. And that's looking at what they actually paid per kilowatt hour over the past 5 years. If you log on to pnm.com, you can look back at your payment history, and that's a useful endeavor if you don't believe me about the 5%. I went back and looked at my some electric bills from the 2007-2008 timeframe, and they were probably just a little over half of what I'm paying now on a per kilowatt hour basis. So that's pretty compelling, especially you come back to that question about, well, I'm only saving $10 a month, big deal. Couple things about that. The first thing is the numbers that you use if you get a lease proposal. The kilowatt hour numbers are conservative. We partner with a company called Sonova. This is an example of one of their proposals. And when they tell you on this proposal how many kilowatt hours that this system is going to produce, do you think they'd want to overestimate that? No. They're going to underestimate it a little bit, because if it makes sense at that rate or at that quantity of kilowatt hours, you're probably going to produce more than that, but they certainly don't want to come out of pocket and pay you for production that the system did not live up to. So that's the first thing I say in that scenario about the $10 a month savings. The second thing I say is if we could go back in time and it was 1989, first of all, I would have had the very same haircut. So I don't know what to tell you about that. It seems to be working for me. Men never change their hairstyles. But one thing that does change is the cost that we pay for energy. And if you look at what a gallon of gasoline cost back in 1990, and I don't know exactly what it was. I think it was probably $1 or $1.05, something like that. And if I came to you, let's say it's $1.05, and I say, I've got this 25-year contract here, and I'd like to sell you gasoline, all the gasoline you can buy for the next 25 years at $1 a gallon, you would say, it's only 5 cents a gallon. That's really not a big deal. I'm going to save $10, $20 a year. Call me next year. But if you'd locked that in, would you be happy or sad at the end of that 25-year contract when I came back and said, got to renegotiate that now. Let's talk about $3. I think you'd be sad. So, looking forward, looking down the line, and this proposal does a nice job of showing that. And by the way, it has a year-by-year pro forma that will show you exactly what we estimate you would be saving each year in that 25-year period. Even at 5%, the amount you're going to be paying for electricity is going to be staggering in that 25-year period. There's a couple of regulatory filings that are before the PRC right now that are going to impact this. One is, if you're viewing this video after this decision was made, see how good my crystal ball is. One is the replacement of 2 coal-fired power plants at the Four Corners, in the Four Corners area, the San Juan power plants. That energy has to be replaced, and that's not going to be cheap. So I would estimate in the next rate filing that the utility here is probably going to be asking for on the order of at least a 15% rate increase over the next 2 years. And if history is a guide, they're going to get at least half of that. So bam, you're at 8%. And now my 5% projection is conservative. So we'll see what happens. There is also an EPA rule that is going to go into effect. It's going to limit the amount of carbon, which in my view is probably going to take another one of those power plants offline. And the hope is that renewables have gotten to a point that the power they replace that with is not going to be as expensive. But there's a lot of infrastructure changes that are coming over the next few years that should increase the cost of electricity. If you are betting that the cost of electricity is going to go down and you're willing to put some money on that bet, my email address is on that website. I will take that. I will give 3-to-1 odds. And let's see what happens over the next 5 years. But and in that case, if you really believe that the cost of energy is going to go down, then solar is definitely not for you. But if you think it's going to go up by 2 or 3% or more, then solar already makes sense today. So every time electricity goes up, it's going to make more and more sense, and it's going to make the value of the energy produced by that system greater and greater. But again, it's a simple technology, and it cash flows today. So if the cost of electricity never goes up, you're still saving. Let's talk a little bit about some of the different technologies. I kind of touched on this. There's different places to mount solar, but by far and away, the best case scenario is rooftop solar. You can see that in a couple of the pictures. Pitched roof, flat roof, and when it comes to flat roofs, we have a lot of those in New Mexico. For the most part, we never penetrate a flat roof. We use a ballasted system. And any contractor you deal with, solar contractor, is going to be required to have a structural engineer review your plans, review the load that places on the roof, and stamp those plans and certify that is going to be a safe amount of weight to add to the roof. In most cases, we're well under the tolerances, especially if it's a property that's been built in the last 50 years. When we get to some of the construction that's over 50 years and the rafter spacing is a little greater, it's not a showstopper, but sometimes we have to add some structural members to support that and do some interesting stuff on the roof, but all of that is doable. When it comes to ground-mounted solars, that photo on the bottom you see is an example of a ground-mounted solar. Those work as well, and they still are financially feasible at the larger system size. So as a rule of thumb, I would say if your average electric bill throughout the year is $125, $150, let's cut it off at 125. If it's above 125, you might as well model it. We do that for free. I think any solar contractor is going to model it and tell you exactly how much solar you need and exactly what it would cost, and then you can look and see if it makes sense. going back to the different arrows in the quiver there, we talked a lot about lease incentives. Here's some benefits if you are looking for a place to invest money and you have the cash to invest, and it's either going to be invested in a financial instrument or real property or solar. There are lots and lots of articles in Forbes and lots of places that talk about whether or not solar makes good sense as an investment of money that you were going to invest anyway. And the bottom line is it's a great investment. And some of the reasons for that is currently there's a 30% federal tax credit. There's a 10% state tax credit. That's a personal tax credit. It's available for some businesses on kind of a case-by-case basis, and we could guide you through that. You don't pay any gross receipts tax on the equipment or the installation of solar. And there's some property tax advantages as well. And then we talked about the P&M rec payment. So you factor all of that in, and typically you're looking at, and this is a concept that's really unique to paying cash for a system, and that is return on investment. When does the savings from the solar system pay for my initial outlay? And the short answer is, in most cases, 5 or 6 years currently. That used to be 8 to 10 years when I was giving this presentation, and it's a lot shorter now. So, if you have cash that you want to invest for a certain period of time, 5, 6 years, then solar is a great way to do it. And then guess what? You've got another 20 years of system life minimum warranted after that, in which you're getting free electricity because you've already paid for the system. One of the other ways to go solar is to finance it. And this is an example of a proposal that lays that out. Again, it's going to be unique to the size of system that you need, which is again going to be dependent on how much energy you use. And most companies will have a proposal that follows this format to show you, okay, what is the upfront system cost? What are my tax credits coming back? What's left? And then if I take what's left and finance it, what's the monthly payment compared to how much I save on the energy that I never bought from the utility, plus the rec payment if there is any. And you can see it cash flows. In this case, the red circle there, the bottom one is the total monthly value of the system. In other words, how much am I saving on energy plus how much am I getting from the utility? And so what am I paying to receive that benefit? And that's the number at the very bottom. And as you can see, you're left over with profit, as I call it. Because of course, any solar system is going to save you money if you don't take into consideration how much you have to pay for the equipment. But most solar systems, there will be money left over after you've paid for the equipment. So in kind of wrapping things up here a little bit, you can see this slide is an example of a site plan for a solar array. The solar consultant that does the initial layout of your solar array will come to you with something like this as a conceptual drawing to say, I've looked at your energy usage, looks like you need 20 panels or whatever the case may be, and they will physically lay it out on your roof to give you a conceptual idea of where it would go, what some of the ideas are. And then if it makes sense for you at that point in time, then we move forward and contract a project. And at that point, we conduct a site survey by a professional solar designer. He's going to come out, he's going to measure every nook and cranny, every space, and then place the specific solar array into a CAD program and come up with an engineer grade drawing, which as a customer you would see that again. We would send you that along with elevations or the sort of the side view to show where the equipment's going to go and say, hey, is this what you had in mind? Does this work? Do you approve of this? And once you approve of that layout, that design, we submit for a permit from the jurisdiction, either the city, county, state, whatever the case may be, depending on where we are, and we apply to the utility for interconnection. And that's it. I mean, that we take care of the rest of the process. So again, as the confusion sets in, remember those two things. It's a simple technology, and it cash flows. If it doesn't cash flow, then it probably doesn't make sense for you, and in which case, you probably wouldn't be interested in the project. But in the vast majority of cases, it's going to make financial sense. So as your eyes glaze over talking about watts and volts and inverters and different warranties and this and that, just remember, at the end of the day, if the system cash flows, why wouldn't you do it? Thanks so much for your time.